Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Batra. We're up to Perikei Mishnah Dalid. Today's Mishnayot should be Le'elu Nishmat, Neria ben Svetlana Ranbaev, Eliyahu ben Burcha Israelov, Chana bat Miriam, Sason ben Ryan, Yoshua ben Shivra, Menuchatam began Eden, Amen, and Avdi ben Chaim Lechaim, and the Refuah Shenemav, Daniel Shalom ben Rosa, Betoch Shachol Israel, and the Achlama Merav ben Amin, Od Zion Chai ben Dvorah. The next Mishnah in the chapter speaks about someone who buys fruit trees that are growing in another person's property. The Mishnah begins by citing a dispute between two Tanaim. Hakoneh shnei ilanot betoch sde chavero. If someone buys two fruit-bearing trees that are located within his fellow's field, he has not bought any land along with the trees. Rather, he has bought the right to leave the trees growing within his fellow's field as long as they live, and the right to the fruit of the trees as well as the wood of the trees themselves. Certainly this is true if he purchased only a single tree. Rabbi Meir Omer, but Rabbi Meir says, Kana Kalka, he has bought the land as well. Rabbi Meir is of the opinion that one who purchases two or more trees is deemed to have purchased an orchard. Rabbi Meir agrees, however, that one who purchases a single tree does not receive any land. The Mishnah now explains what the rights of such a buyer are according to the Tana Kama. Higdilu, if the trees grew larger after the sale, lo yishapeh, the seller may not cut them back, even though the shade of the trees is not good for his field, for he is obligated to provide support for the trees from his land while they live. Since the buyer receives no land, the seller's land is pledged to provide both space and nourishment for the trees as long as they live. This includes allowing the trees to cast shade over the seller's land, even though this is bad for the crops that grow there, no matter how large they grow. And whatever shoots or branches grow from the trunk of the tree above ground level belong to the buyer, as they are considered part of the tree. The shoots belong to the buyer because they are considered part of the tree. However, he may not leave them in place. He must cut them off and remove them. For we are concerned that if they are left in place, the soil may eventually cover the point at which they are attached to the trunk, making them appear to be separate trees. This would allow the buyer to claim that he had bought 3 trees, which would entitle him to land, as the Mishnah will teach later on. To avoid the possibility of such a claim, the seller can force the buyer to cut off the shoots and use them for firewood. Umina shorashim shel ba'al kalka, but whatever shoots grow from the roots, meaning if they are attached beneath the ground, they belong to the owner of the field. These shoots are considered to have grown from the field itself rather than from the tree. Although they are connected to the roots of the tree beneath the ground, they therefore belong to the seller. V'metu, and if the tree dies, en lo kalka, the buyer has no rights in the land to plant new trees in their place. Rather, he must uproot the dead trees and remove them from the land. The seller's land is pledged to the trees only as long as the trees are alive. Once they are dead, the seller can require that they be removed. Now, these rules apply to one who bought less than 3 trees. One who buys 3 or more trees is considered to have bought an orchard, meaning a field with trees. The Mishnah now discusses the laws that apply to such a sale. Kana shlosha, if he bought 3 or more trees. Kana kalka, he has also bought the land that is underneath, beneath, and between the trees, along with the trees themselves. This land is the orchard that one receives when he buys 3 or more fruit-bearing trees. Now, this law applies only when the distance between trees is not less than 4 amot and not more than 16 amot, and only when the trees are arranged in a triangular formation rather than in a row. Only trees spaced in this way are considered an orchard, because if the trees are closer together, they will stunt each other's growth, and one or more will eventually be removed. And if they are farther apart, all of the land is not necessary for their support. If the trees are properly spaced, then the buyer receives all the land under and between the trees, as well as any non-fruit trees or other plants that are growing there. He also receives enough land outside the perimeter of the trees for a picker and his basket to stand there when picking the tree's fruit. Higdilu, if the trees grew after the sale and spread outside the area that belongs to the buyer, Ishapeh, the seller may cut them back because the shade of the trees is not good for the seller's land, and the buyer has no claim to any land that was not included in the sale. This is different from the earlier case of the Mishnah, where we learned that the seller of 2 trees may not cut back the trees. In that case, the seller's land is pledged to the trees because the buyer did not receive any land. Here, however, where the buyer has received land, the seller has no further responsibility to provide for the trees. Therefore, if the trees spread out and the shade is damaging his land, he may cut back the branches, and the branches belong to the buyer. And whatever shoots or branches grow from the trees, whether they grow from the trunk of the tree or the roots, belong to the buyer, because both the trees themselves and the ground beneath them belong to him. And if the trees die, he still owns the land, and he may plant other trees to take their place. Since he purchased an orchard rather than trees, he has the right to replant any trees that die or to use the land in any way he wishes. And that is then of Mishnah Daled. Mishnah Hay deals with one who buys sections of slaughtered animals for meat and details the customs that were common in those times regarding what sections were sold together. However, if the customs in a certain city were different from those detailed in the Mishnah, those customs are to be followed. Certainly this is true of the laws taught in the previous Mishnah in the last 2 chapters as well. The Rav makes this point here in particular because it is with regard to these particular rulings about meat, the customs that differed from those mentioned in the Mishnah were well known. If someone sells the head of a large animal, now the Mishnah here uses the term large animal to refer to cattle, bulls, cows, and steers, and the term small animal to refer to sheep and goats. If someone sells the head of a large animal, lo macharat raglaim, he has not sold the legs of the animal together with the head, as the legs of a large animal contain enough meat to be considered a separate section. Macharat raglaim, and certainly if he sold the legs, lo macharat rosh, he has not sold the head. Since the head and legs of a large animal, each significant sections, it was the custom to sell them separately. Therefore, the sale of either one does not include the other, although the head section is more significant than the legs. Macharat kanes, similarly, if he sold the windpipe section of a large animal, which includes both the lungs and the heart of the animal, the word kaneh literally means pipe. It's used here to refer to the lung section, which includes the trachea, the windpipe of the animal. Lo macharat kaved, he has not sold the liver. Macharat kaved, and if he sold the liver of a large animal, lo macharat kaneh, he has not sold the windpipe section. Each of these is considered significant on its own and is not included in the sale of the other. Aval pataka, but when someone sells the sections of a small animal, a sheep or a goat, the law is different because some sections are small and they are customarily included with the sale of the larger sections. Macharat rosh, therefore one who sold the head, macharat raglaim, has sold the legs in this case. Macharat raglaim, but one who sold the legs, lo macharat rosh, has not sold the head, even in the case of a small animal, because the head of even a small animal is significant enough to be sold on its own. So again, one who sold the head has sold the legs, but one who sold the legs has not sold the head. Macharat kanes, similarly, one who sold the windpipe section of a small animal, macharat kaved, has also sold the liver along with it. Macharat kaved, but one who sold the liver, lo macharat kanes, has not sold the windpipe section, which is more significant. In the case of a small animal, the custom is that selling the more significant section by name automatically includes the less significant section that is often sold along with it. But selling the less significant section by name does not automatically include the more significant section. And that is an abotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.